Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stedman podcast. We have an exciting episode because we actually have a couple as our guest today. But before we introduce our wonderful guest, joining me is my co-host, Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing?
Good, and I'm glad it's not you and I that we're talking about as a couple because we get together every week, but we actually have a married couple that's going to talk about
Yes, a married
things
couple,
today.
not me and Micah.
Yes, so we're just a couple of pastors that cut up every week, and
Yep.
so anyway, yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And joining me today is Karson and Ashley Collins. Welcome to the Stedman podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Now, Karson, how many years have we known each other?
Oh man, we got to go back to like 01 maybe. You want to go back
to it's
high school district stuff, Northeast Ohio Church of God, winter retreat, camp meetings.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's been a long time. And then of course you did your church planning stuff, and then I did the old boring route of actually trying to find churches that are already planted and just trying to see if I can make something grow from it. Not very successful at either one. So.
It's not easy, man.
It's not easy.
Planting is sometimes a little bit easier than revitalization.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? But before we dive right into our topic and get to talk to Karson and Ashley, Stories Gone Wild. So Karson and Ashley, since it's your first time on the show, Stories Gone Wild, just a segment where we just kind of talk about strange, weird stories or occurrences that happen. And I know I put you on the spot in saying you do that, so I'm going to give you time to think about it, and I'll go ahead and jump first. And Micah, you can follow along. And then if you guys have one, you say, okay, we're ready. Or you say, yep, we don't have one. Let's move on. Okay. So I'm in the midst of my doctorate program at Ashland Theological Seminary, and I'm taking a class called Leading the Church in the 21st Century. So yesterday was the topic of women in ministry, which within the Church of God, not very controversial, not a big deal. We've had women in ministry for a while. So we're talking about it, and the professor, he is Assemblies of God. He basically grew up very fundamentalist, as right as you can, and eventually he says he's now just to the middle. He's middle of right, or however you would say that. So he's very supportive of women in ministry. Gave his whole story about how it was his mom who led him to Christ. So many women were influential in his faith development. And even when he started searching the scriptures and doing it himself, he realized that there is a case, a biblical and even an exegetical case about women should be priests, prophets, all that things. And he did the work himself. So cool. And the way our class is set up, he lectures for the first half of class, and then he has a guest speaker come in. So we had this woman come in, and she spoke about women's ministry. She's in top leadership of the Assemblies of God. Wonderful. Great conversation. Then we have a time for Q&A for the last hour of class. And that's when things got a little weird, because instead of, he's asking about women in ministry classes and people are asking questions. I had one, but I was just kind of holding off on it. And then all of a sudden, he starts asking, because she grew up in Canton, Ohio, and asked the question about, how much of that little girl, who grew up on the streets of Canton, like how much is that angst girl still in you when it comes to ministry? And she's kind of talked about it because they're good friends, they're close, they work together. So it's like, okay, getting a little personal, but it's still in the theme of women in ministry. And then he starts asking question about her childhood, about some of the horrible things that happened to her. And all of a sudden you can just see the tension just thicken. And I'm sitting over, I have two beautiful African-American women sitting right next to me. And I happen to glance over, this lady has her phone in her hand, and I see the text message with the lady sitting next to her going, why are we talking about this? And then the question mark. And I'm thinking, so then I raised my hand to ask my question, which was about advocacy and men advocating for women. And what do you do when you get pushback from men? What do you do when you get pushback from women who are saying like, hey, women shouldn't be pastors, from women? I'm like, oh, that's weird, but I've had that happen before. Hoping to break the tension. Let's move away from this. She answers it. We have a discussion. Great. 15 minutes less the class. And then all of a sudden it goes right back into that. And I'm just like literally counting the minutes to get out of that room. It was the weirdest thing. And the whole entire time I'm sitting there thinking, how was that relevant to women in ministry? It was so weird. And I even talking afterwards with some students, they're like, I don't know what that was. It didn't make sense. Why were we talking about this? This isn't a counseling class. I'm like, it's not a therapy session either, but there we go. So
turned into one.
It turned into one, a very awkward one where it's like, should we actually be in the room or should we just leave and put like, do not disturb counseling in session on the classroom door? Micah, what's your story gone wild?
Well, that is a doozy. You texted me the other day and you're like, man, I got a doozy for when we record with.
And I wasn't lying about that.
Yeah, you said we had a doozy. So, I went to seminary, I went to Anderson. And so those intensive weeks where you get together with folks, it's like, you never know. You never know what somebody's going to say or the deep rabbit hole of conversation we're going to get. And, I went to seminary 10 years ago. So like, I can't imagine what folks are talking about today and the political climate that we're living in and some other conversations that we're having. But I was trying to think of stories gone wild before we recorded. And, we've recorded a couple of episodes this week to drop for later dates. And so I'm thinking about digging in the vault of stories because I don't have one because I shared more recently in the last episode we did. But I was thinking about a transition in ministry, and we've talked recently about some transitions and things like that. And I remember I was creative arts pastor at a church in North Carolina, and the church is closed now. So it's like it's it's public knowledge and everything like that. So we talked about what'd you say?
Safe.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's safe, but it's I'd probably tell the story anyway and just not say the name of the church. Right. But anyway, we have been at this church for 7-8 months, and my wife and I was from Ohio, and her mom and dad live in Dayton, in the Dayton area, the greater Dayton area. And we had come home for Christmas, and we got job offers to come back home. And I got a job offer at another church, and she got a job offer at Miami. And we just felt like there was a transition coming, and we just didn't feel like we were a good fit for the church we were at. And the church provided me a laptop to do all my work on, because I did worship and social media, marketing, website, all that stuff. And so the office manager of that church was like the if you could define penny pincher, the woman's picture would be next to it in the dictionary, right? So the pastor told me that I could keep the computer, and that I could just be done and, walk out of the church. And he appreciated my time there and, appreciated everything I did. And so the Monday that I walked in, so like I had my last Sunday, I went in on Monday to get my last check. We were moving later that week. She was like, I need your computer. She was holding my paycheck hostage. Wow. Until I gave her the computer. And this is after the elders and the pastor told me that I could keep the computer. And I was like, I hadn't wiped his computer. It had personal information on it. Like, it was still very much like I used it the day before kind of thing. And so here I am sitting in the sanctuary. Lord, what am I supposed to do? Like, I literally left her office. I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I called the pastor. He's like, it's probably just not worth the fight. You should probably just give it to her. And I called my wife and I'm like, this is ridiculous. They're holding my paycheck. We need this money so that we can move hostage so that I can leave. So I'm like, you know what, Lord, it's not worth it. You provided before, you'll provide again. And so I sat in the sanctuary and I wiped the hard drive of that computer as I'm talking. And by the way, my wife and I have been married like 6 months. I know we're going to talk about marriage and relationships in a little bit, but like, and I think that's probably why I shared this story, but like, she's like, it's not worth it. It was confirmation. Wiped the computer, gave it to the admin. She gave me my check, and I was like, you have a great day. It's been great working. It's been great working with you.
Yeah.
Peace. And that was my the last time I talked to that lady.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same woman who, like, she grew up in that church. Her family was in that church. She was the admin of that church for years and years and years and years. When the church closed its doors, she kind of went down with the Titanic kind of thing. And everything was a fight with her. We painted the exterior walls of the like, it was like a pentagon. The church building was a pentagon shape. Mm-hmm. And so like the exterior hallways, we painted it. And we all voted on like what we would want to paint it. And I'm not kidding you. It was like a tan color. we probably painted it the same color, like it maybe a shade or two different, right? And she pitched a fit about it. Like there was no pleasing this woman at all.
Yeah.
So
that's Church of God at its finest right there.
hallelujah. Glory. You don't know me. I mean, you don't know me from Adam. We just met. So like I grew up Church of God. I'm ordained Church of God. I've worked in Church of God for 10 years. My dad's a Church of God pastor and has been for 40 years. He and I butt heads on theology and butt heads on church culture, and the hymns are the heritage of our faith. And if he listens to this, I love you, Dad, but I don't think you're right. So yeah. You guys have a story for us?
You guys have a story? You guys are like, Ash was like, nope.
I'm sure you have plenty of ministry stories with planning churches or whatever.
Yeah, but I'll just tell you what happened yesterday.
Okay.
Fresh on the market.
I was at I'm a full-time insulator by trade, union insulator. And we had our union meetings generally on the first Tuesday of the month, but because it was 4th of July week, we moved it back a week. And we're sitting there and a guy raises his hands and he tells, the 30 of us or whatever in there, he's like, you guys can believe what these other people are saying if you want to be dummies, and all this. And so he calls all of us dummies. And so one of my buddies up front raises his hand and he says, hey, I just want to be real clear. Are we calling each other names at these meetings? Is this something that we're allowed to do? And then it stopped being funny because the guy in the back said, hey, what are you going to go? You can go kill yourself? Jeez. Now, the person had a history, right? An issue in the past at a different place. And this person knew it. And I tell you what, my head has never snapped around quicker because there's only 3 rows. It's not a big room. There's 3 rows. I'm in the front. He's in the back. And my head snapped around like, I can't believe that just come out of your mouth. And so my buddy up front gets up and I think, this guy's about to walk out, I'm like, and it's like, they should have slammed the gavel. Like the guy should have been thrown out for saying anything remotely like that. And so, my buddy's about to walk out. And so I'm like, I'm walking out too. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, who does this? So I'm right behind him. And instead of going towards the door, he makes a hard left right at that guy. And it starts pushing towards him. And I find myself in the middle of a little bit of a scramble. And I'm holding him back, pushing him. You can't fight. We're not fighting. We're not doing this, and walking out. And I just, I was just completely blown away that someone would take someone's worst moment, their hardest time, their lowest point of existence. And that's, we'll talk about it probably a little later, but that hit close to home for me. Like when we were at the bottom of what we were going through, that crossed my mind more than once. And so I was really heartbroken. And we ended up leaving the meeting. And I've never left a union meeting before in my life. I've been in about 6 years now, but I've never left a union meeting before. And I couldn't accept it. And so that got a little wild. And no one got hit. No one, there was some pointing and some rearing back or whatever, but I was able to hold the guy back. So lucky for the other guy.
That's never fun. I've been in that situation where someone just goes and I'm like holding a guy back and I'm just sitting there like
a Church of God board meeting.
Oh, yeah.
I've been in words. I wasn't gonna lie.
Not quite, but there's been times where I've had to hold people back, or especially at camp when I have like a couple of kids and here I am like hugging 3 kids who are charging and I'm the wall and I'm pushing back against them. Like, calm down, take deep breaths. Okay, think of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was wild, man. That was yesterday.
Oh, wow. Goodness. So, like I've said, friends, we have Karson and Ashley Collins with us, and I've known Karson for a lot of years. And so Karson and Ashley, and you guys can choose who goes first, but just kind of do a quick introduction of who you are, kind of what your life is like, and kind of your current ministry context.
Yeah. So I was raised Church of God, from at Ellett Church of God there in Akron, and went through that whole thing. Got called to ministry probably when I was a junior in high school. Went to decided to go to Warner University after a missions trip to Church on the Street in Atlanta. Went there, did 1 year in class, came back. I got married to my first wife at between in the middle of freshman year, so between semesters, and we moved back here to Ohio, where I just got into youth ministry and got another job and tried to finish school at the same time. So it took me about 7 years. By the time I finished school, I had been through two youth ministry jobs, one at Ravenna, one at Ellet, and kind of did some young adult ministry, a little bit of a young adult service, church planting within a church type thing, which is kind of what they tell you to do if you can't get the traditional service off the ground a lot of times. So did that, went out and started planting a church in Lorain County, kind of Amherst, Lorain cities there, and did that for about 10 years. And now I am currently going for my master's of divinity at MTSO in near Columbus there, and am the director of outreach and community engagement at Lakewood United Methodist Church, and I run their contemporary service, for a better term, preach every Sunday or most Sundays.
What is it with you Church of God guys going to UMC?
They take care of us.
It's the Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Maybe I should join. Maybe I should join or
me.
something. Like Scott was mentioning a guy a couple of weeks ago. So I work at Miami in higher ed, and didn't you say you have a friend that pastors the UMC Church in Oxford?
Yeah, Caleb Henry. Yeah. He was Ontario Church of God, and now he's in Oxford United Methodist Church. And I went to Anderson with him too. So
there's another one.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. And Ashley, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Ashley. I'm a full-time accountant, a mother of 3 teenagers, and my role in ministry is my own, so it's not associated with the church. So what we do is provide support and Christmas gifts, Easter gifts, whatever they need for children who've lost a parent.
Every child.
It's called Everyone's Child.
Everyone's Child.
Yeah.
Everyone's Child. That's cool. Awesome. And is there like a website or something for?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, that's cool. So it's kind of like
about 6 years we've been doing that now. So we used to be able to do one family, and we're just being blessed to be able to do 3 families per year.
Wonderful. Great. So Karson, and even you too, Ashley, with like that, because I think I'm very excited about that ministry. So how did that tell me a little bit about the genesis? Was that something that you kind of created, or was it something that someone else had and you just kind of tagged along and kind of made it your own? Like, tell me a little bit about that calling and you doing that ministry.
So my sister had passed away from a heroin overdose years ago, and so I met some other families who went through something. And so there was a mom who had lost her daughter, so she was raising her granddaughters, and she couldn't provide Christmas one year. And some of my colleagues at work were like, hey, we want to sponsor a family, but we don't know anyone in need. And I'm like, I do. And so I just started connecting people who wanted to help out with people who were in need. So now we just have so many supporters that we just find the families, they just show up, and the supporters show up.
Yeah, we did do our first fundraiser, or she had, not ours, yours, it's her thing, but our first fundraiser this year because we knew we had a couple families and we wanted to get prepared and make sure we could provide. So, and it went well.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. So Karson, you said junior year, you kind of felt that call to ministry. So kind of tell me a little bit about that and kind of what got you interested in kind of doing the whole church planning thing.
Yeah, that's, so I don't know if my original feeling about church planting, I just felt that there was a disconnect between, I didn't want to invite my friends to church, and it seemed like people liked being around Jesus. And so it's like, well, why don't I want to invite people to church? But people are supposed to be attracted to Jesus. Like, so there's something not lining up between the church and what it seems like I'm reading about Jesus in the Bible, because I was given my Bible when I got saved, in Detroit, Michigan, and when I was 13 years old, right after Columbine. It's like 3 days after Columbine. and I was given a Bible, and I just read it every night. Even when I wasn't even being Christian like during the week, but it's like I was going to read my Bible every night just to check my boxes. And you just read it enough, and things didn't line up. And so we got a pastor that, for the first time, made me pay attention, like caught me, and hooked me. And I realized that there was more to just than youth group or just showing up. It was like, there's something really here. And he gave me Rick Warren's book. It's just Barney Fultz was the pastor, Byron. And he gave the book to me, Purpose Driven Church. And I told him from that moment I said, you wrecked me for any pastor that will ever. I was like, because I'm not okay with the way it is. And so that was how that worked out. And then church planting happened. My ex-father-in-law and his wife at the time were planting a church, and I had their granddaughter, with me, and they wanted her closer. So they hired me, as the preaching pastor, and it was baptism by fire, man. It was like, here's the pulpit, you're preaching every week. I had preached 5 times, before that. And it was just one of those things that is like, you either figure it out or you don't. And that's how that church plant took off.
Good. And then, so how many churches have you planted at your time before you end up where you were at now?
That was the first one. We had tried to, when I don't know, is Esther still the director?
She's the general
state
director,
pastor
yeah,
of Ohio Ministries.
or state pastor, yeah.
So she had visited me at Ellet when I was there, and she was like, "You kind of got to plant a church within this church for it to survive." And so that was my first attempt at it. But then once I went to Great Lakes out there in Amherst, that's where I got my church planting kind of baptism, I guess.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, so you talked about being married to your first wife, and now you're divorced. So how did you and Ashley meet?
Christian Mingle.
Wow.
Your loved one at Christian Mingle too. I don't know. Do you get ads? Do you do ads?
So Karson, I'm going to have to tell you this. If you go through the archives, if you actually go to thescottstedman.com and you go probably all the way to the very bottom,
yeah,
I'm making fun of Christian Mingle. And because of the commercials, but then there was also a part of me, because I had a woman that was at my church who met her husband through Plenty of Fish. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I said, and we were just talking. She goes, yeah, I was on Christian Mingle first. And I just felt like every guy I dated definitely wasn't a Christian. So I'm like, oh, okay. So then I actually made fun of them. And then I actually got someone commented on it. It was actually a representative from Christian Mingle saying, oh, no, we're a good site. Like, I think it's good that we have like a special site for Christians to find each other, and was like very like did not appreciated my my comments about them. So go ahead, tell us about ChristianMingle.com. Be the people on the commercial.
It was funny because she didn't have a paid version for it. But so like we couldn't. How'd that work? You explain it. You were on it longer than I was.
Yeah, that's not the plan.
Oh jeez.
No, I didn't have a paid version, but I would, 10 o'clock at night, I would scroll and whatever. And then I seen his face. I'm like, that's my friend's pastor. This is really weird. So I text my friend, like, why is your pastor on here and stuff? And he didn't answer me back quickly. So I found him on Facebook, and I was like, hey, like, why are you on Christian Mingle? And we started talking after that.
Why are you on Christian Mingle? You creepy pastor, you?
Yeah, basically.
Didn't Scott, I'm sorry, didn't you one of your stories gone wild, you had shared a TikTok video with me, like this was several months ago, but there was a guy who was a super cringy pastor. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys do TikTok or are on TikTok or anything like that.
Yeah, a little bit.
So there's this guy, I don't even know what church it was at. I don't know where he's at, but he was like, I don't know, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, but he was saying the most cringiest things.
And not only that, he had a profile on Tinder as in a sermon illustration, and he's swiping people up on stage, and he's reading their like profile. And I'm like,
he's got his phone up and he's going,
gross.
Wow.
But he also
don't do that, Karson.
Yeah.
No pastor who's listening to this should do that. That's no.
No, was it? But he was using it as a sermon illustration, but he was married. Like he
He's
was
also
talking
married
about
too, so that was even
like
weird too.
online dating and this, and it's like, bro, you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's tough.
But yeah, I knew he was married, so I'm like, something happened, and I'm so nosy. I have to
Yeah.
find out who it was.
Yeah.
And it was
So
your nosiness that brought you together.
Yeah.
Yeah, we live 5
Yeah.
minutes from each other. Like it worked out.
Wonderful. So that's great. And christianmingle.com, if you happen to listen to this podcast, this reach for Karson and Ashley Collins. They could be your representatives like those eHarmony.
We're looking for sponsors.
Wait till you watch the rest of the episode first.
Pause right here and just hire them for a commercial, give them extra money. Don't listen to the rest of this episode. Oh goodness. So you guys, you meet on christianmingle.com. How long were you dating before you finally got married after that encounter?
Hey, a year.
Okay. That's
It's
not bad. I
awful.
mean, I say that's typical. Yeah.
Especially
I
if
mean,
you're older.
I say that typical because a lot of people who have had their first marriages,
Right.
and then they get their second marriages, they're not doing a very long courtship. It's not like Laura and I, when we started dating, we dated for 3 years, was engaged for a year and a half, and then finally got married. I don't know if that was kind of your experience with your first wife, Karson, but it just seemed like it was a lot longer than most people when they do their second or third marriages. Very quickly, like almost like a year, maybe even less, but no longer than a year mostly.
Yeah, the church kind of pushes that.
Oh, especially wow. So that was kind of the thing.
It's how else I mean, what did Paul say? It's better to marry than burn with lust or something like that. So it's kind of that old school traditional values. Yeah, I'm a little more Methodist than I am Church of God anymore. But with some of those old school traditional, like you gotta, I don't know, it's not it's not easy dating as a pastor. It's not,
or as a parent,
or as a parent.
Yeah,
it brings along, because especially once you get married, I don't know when you want to get into some of the stuff, but it's like once you get married, it's like there's no honeymoon period. When you got kids and a church and it's like you're full on family immediately and right in the thick of all of it.
Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting insight that I never even thought of. But I mean, you are, and I think it says something about just kind of that old traditional view. Because because if I'm thinking like if I was in a situation where Laura and I got divorced, and especially now this day and age, where am I going to find somebody? Because either it's going to be at the church I'm pastoring at, which
christianmingle.com.
christianmingle.com, there you go. or it'd be either the churches that I'm a part of, which is, if I'm starting to date someone, then it's going to be everybody's business. And then you're just kind of like feeling awkward, like, okay, then you almost feel like you have to leave the church or they're going to have to leave the church to get dates. So there's some type of privacy in some ways. And then, or it's online. And then, you do have the situation where maybe there's someone at the church or pastor going, why is Pastor Scott on Tinder? Why is Pastor Scott on Christian Mingle or Farmers Only?
I had a pastor call me. I think it was Ed Beck. Was it Ed Beck? Yeah, call me from I was because my divorce wasn't final. But my wife had moved on, and I was talking to Ashley, and then one of my old youth group, somebody I used to be the youth pastor for, was on Christian Mingle also. And instead of going, "Hey Karson, why are you on Christian Mingle?" they went, "Hey Pastor, Carson's on Christian Mingle."
Oh,
so yeah, there's like I said, we maybe didn't do everything the exact way it should have been done. And we paid for it.
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely paid for it.
But I also, and this is my opinion, but I just feel like stuff like that, like it's almost like you have to kind of be very gracious and understanding of people's situations. I mean, if your wife has already moved on and nothing's finalized, I don't see anything wrong with you trying to date again or trying to do something. It's not like, I mean, if she's already going off and doing whatever, I mean, why can't you? What, because you have a REV in front of your name? Like that's, to me, I think that's a little weird. But again, you know, Scott Stedman podcast, I'm always trying to break the mold and get myself in trouble all the time with the churches.
Well, I would bring her around. There's a couple times I brought her around before the divorce was final, and people were just kind of like, even at our church, which for the Church of God was a pretty liberal church. You know, and they're just like, you can't bring her around, which actually then pushes the relationship into a secret.
Yeah, which in some ways that's kind of
you click more to each other, you know. So
it's like now it's Romeo and Juliet, and your family's the church.
Absolutely.
So don't drink the poison, man.
when I was pastoring that same church that I mentioned in my Stories Gone Wild segment in North Carolina, the South was a completely different ballgame as far as certain things, drinking, right? People don't talk about drinking, and my wife will tell you this. She's lived most of her life in the South. I was born in the South. You don't talk about drinking, but it's not uncommon for you to go to somebody's house for dinner on Sunday and there be wine on the table, right? That's one. The other, you guys talked about when you got married, engagements and such. So my wife and I met in October, started dating in December, were engaged in March, and married the following October. And we've been together for 8 years. But we were 28 and we knew. We were like, we've been through college, we've been through high school, we've been through relationships. We knew that we wanted to be with each other. We knew we wanted to get married, so we did, right? So when we moved to North Carolina, we were engaged. And it's like a very much like a Bewitched, like Mrs. Kravitz kind of like, what are they doing?
Yeah,
they're holding hands. I'm like, we're almost 30 years old. Like we're getting married in a month, right? And so like, you know, we when we first moved there, like housing was really hard to find. And so we ended up renting an apartment during our time there, but it was like 6 to 8 weeks before we could get into our place. So like there was a lady who had a townhouse, a 3-bedroom condo. And the first couple of nights I slept on the floor of the church. And the lady was like, that where Alicia was staying with, the one who had the 3-bedroom condo, was like, this is ridiculous. You can stay at my house until your apartment's ready. So like we're sleeping in separate rooms. We're, you know, we shared a bathroom because there's a bathroom between the rooms, but like people in the church were talking. They're like, what's wrong with them? Why are they in the same place? They're not even married. And it's like, this lady goes to the church. She can vouch for us, but people in the South just love to talk. So
they do.
It's very traditional in that respect, as far as like, well, did you see what so-and-so is doing? Did you see what Scott and Laura did the other day? It's not uncommon for people to just, to say those kind of things. So I think it's kind of funny that you shared that as far as like you brought her into the church. What? Your divorce isn't finalized. What? Like, you not cast the first stone, right, friends?
That's it.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about kind of how the church and other pastors are kind of getting in your business, and that kind of caused you guys to say, okay, well, let's get married quickly because, you know, you probably love each other, so that let's get married quickly. But B, there's a little bit of that pressure too. So what were kind of the things that kind of also led to some of the fracturing of your marriage? And then what were some of the steps you take to kind of reconcile your marriage as well?
Let me tell the fracturing.
And what I mean by that is, you know, because you could always talk about the one thing that kind of really, but I'm sure there's probably certain things that just these slow little, like almost like water torture. There was the slow little drops that finally ended up, or the rubber band going around the watermelon before the watermelon finally blows its top.
Was, so we had, like I said, no honeymoon. Right. So there was no honeymoon. So it was like diving right into it. And I've talked, you know, before in some sermons or whatnot, just about kind of our initial kind of getting used to each other, living this with somebody, you know, where you're going from living on your own to sharing kids and sharing a house. Like
I've lived on my own for 7 years before that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was now working from home and she was working, away. And it was a lot of unspoken expectations that no one was meeting.
Mm.
I think is the most concise way to say it. It's like I expected certain things, she expected certain things, but we weren't telling each other.
Mm.
And so that was like right off the rip. There was a lot of friction, like from the get-go. Yeah. So, and then on top of that, my closest friend at the time was not my wife, and was not a guy. And so it was someone that was at the church, and I put a lot of listen, you guys know, as a pastor, people just look up to you. And they want to be around you. People say all the nice things. They see only the nice things about you. It's really easy to kind of get sucked into the positive feelings of other people.
Yeah.
So I feed into it, because we weren't meeting at home. We weren't doing well. And so it's like, well, where can I get that positive affirmation? And I was taking it anywhere I could get it. And so I had a friend that was there at the church. She ended up being the associate pastor at one point, but she was there from the beginning of the church plant. And, shared too many, what we call it, bricks. We call them bricks.
Bricks off the wall.
Sharing too many bricks off the wall with each other, with the wrong people. And that was just a faulty ground to build anything on.
Yeah.
That cover that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, that's always the big thing with all marriages. And I don't know, like, and maybe this is something that I think back to my premarital counseling with Lauren. We did it with William Wimmer at Talmadge when he was the pastor there at Talmadge, which I have a story about that. But anyway, but I mean, I think we talked a little bit. I mean, we talked about finances. We talked about sex. We talked about, the idea of balance as far as like, going, making sure we are balanced as far as like, if we go to my parents' house for Thanksgiving, let's go to her parents' house or for Christmas and all this stuff. But I feel like and then just power struggles, like gender roles or whatever, weird stuff that's brought up in the church in that aspect. But communication, and just being able to say, hey, I feel like that my certain needs are not being met. Yep. And it wasn't until after Laura and I got married and we were living in London, Ohio, and we were attending church at Maiden Lane Church of God. And Joe Engels there, who's a therapist, he was leading couples in a marriage thing. And it was like His Needs, Her Needs by William Harley. And he talked about meeting each other's needs. And that was the first time I think Laura and I, when we saw that, I mean, we ate that up. It's like, so it's like we're doing these inventories, like, here are my top 5 needs, here are your top 5 needs. And we kind of talked about it. And I, even now, like, we'll occasionally go back to it. And we've been married for 16 years this August. And the idea of, as we have kids, as we have careers, as we get older, sometimes certain needs that were like my top 3 in my 20s are not my top 3 now in my 40s. And it's just, and it's always good to kind of get into the habit of talking and communication. So I can really see how meeting, getting to know each other within a year, feeling that pressure from other people, and then you get married, and then it's like, well, we love each other, we're married, but we're not really communicating with each other, and we're not really feeling like our needs are being met. So Ashley, as all this stuff is kind of going on, like, what was kind of your reaction to your side of everything?
Oh, my side of what?
Your side of just, dealing with just the miscommunication. Like, how did you feel that, your needs weren't being met? And like, kind of, I guess, what was kind of your way? Like, I guess, what were your ways of coping? Karson putting bricks in the wrong place. Like, were you doing the same thing, or was your whole thing different of how you kind of?
I just worked more because that's where I felt validated, right? So I felt important. I felt like I was doing the right things. So I worked a lot, which then shuts down more quality time, over and over again. And then also you put on feeling unrealistic expectations from him and the church on this pastor's wife thing, which is a whole nother load of crap. And so that just the added pressures of that, I'm not going to live up to that, but hey, I'm going to be a great accountant and a great team member. And, I'll get my validation from there.
Micah and I have talked about doing an episode on pastors' wives because I know it is, and there's churches that are different. And, and I think either way, whether the expectation,
it is different in different places. And when they did bring him on in the Methodist church, I jokingly told the pastors, hey, just so you know, you're hiring him, you're hiring me. This isn't a 2-for-1 special.
Yeah. And believe me, that was the big thing too. And a lot of times, like when I would interview for pay, especially in the Church of God, like even after I left being in Virginia for 7 years, they always wanted to interview my wife. And a couple of times I'm just saying, well, she works at a school. She's going to school too, to get her teaching thing, and I would, and in some ways I'm being honest, but other ways it's like, why do you need to talk to her? You're hiring me. But
Right.
There is that thing where, the pastor's wife is kind of either the linchpin of a pastor getting a job, which I feel like it's not about, you could be the most skilled person in the world, but if you have a wife that, is not going to be at every women's ministry event or not going to be the secretary or the piano player, then It's like, oh, well, sorry, we're not going to hire you. We'll hire this guy who only preaches out of Matthew.
Yeah.
But his wife cooks and sews
church.
buttons and can reupholster all the pews. So we're going to hire her. And it's like, well, really, you're just hiring the wife. Why don't you just give her the paycheck and just let that guy, continue to read the book of Matthew?
But for a small struggling church, it makes sense. He's like, I need a 2-for-1.
They don't pay enough. I still got to go to work.
So, but we're just like not interested. But I get why they do it. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do too. But I think it's one of those old mentalities that, again, just needs to change. Because I think even when smaller churches, the expectation, even if the roles were reversed and I was, Laura was a man, I was a woman, and I was in that role, I don't even know if I could even live up to all the expectations of every single person within that church. And then on top of that, the expectations of my husband, who's the pastor.
Well, I was going to say too that you guys don't know my story, Scott does, but in the last year, I've stepped back from full-time ministry, kind of in a season of sabbatical and a season of healing and a season of not knowing where we're going to end up next. And I'm okay with that because we both have full-time jobs elsewhere, and my job isn't dependent on the church. And that's a whole separate conversation. But in respect to what you guys are saying about relationships and spouses of pastors, one of the things that my wife and I have really prayed about and discussed and shared with each other over the last 6 to 8 months has been, I don't expect me to serve. This is my wife speaking. Don't expect me to serve, and don't expect me to do this, and this if you decide to get back into ministry. And I'm okay with that, and she's okay with that. But it's hard because we both have servants' hearts, and that's what we want to do. But I think the problem that we have is that it's like Scott saying, not even just a Church of God thing. I think it's an older church mindset, regardless of the denomination. I said denomination, Scott. Are you proud of me? Denomination. Like Church of God movement, denomination, whatever you want to call it. Period.
Storage USA.
When we're done recording, have Scott tell you that story.
Right,
The idea of, the last church I served at, it was like, it was primarily older. However, they're like, why don't you want to hang out with us? Like, it was that church. I think there's a difference in community and being a part of life groups and being a part of the culture of the church and being a part of the church and being the church body and just living and breathing the church because that's all you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the church that we were at had a very hard time understanding that we both were working professionals I'm in graduate school working on a master's program. My wife has a really high pressure job where she works, and she makes like triple the money that I do. And I'm okay with that, but like it comes with a lot of responsibility.
Right.
She just wants to go to church.
Right.
Like early in our marriage, it was like, okay, she can sing harmony and she'll sing with me once in a while. She loves to run slides. She gets some of the media stuff and the live streaming stuff, and she's great at it, but she doesn't want to be glued to that chair every single week. She just wants to go and be my wife and not, and worship the creator that created her and brought her into this universe, not be a slave to, oh, you're married to him, so therefore, like you said earlier, a 2-for-1 special. Like it's very we could probably do a whole podcast on that. And Scott and I talked about doing pastor's life podcasts, but like it's, I've talked about writing a book about 2 different books. One's, more focused on being a pastor's kid and growing up in a pastor's home. And I wanted to call it The Unrealistic Expectation because you kind of shared that phrase a little bit earlier. But like it's not just in being a pastor's kid, it's in being a pastor and being a pastor's wife and being a kid of a pastor. There's all these expectations that you're never going to be able to obtain. And then, by the way, like you said, people look up to you, but you can't screw up, right? You can't make mistakes, right? Like we preach grace and forgiveness at people every single week, right? But we don't get it reciprocated to us. It's such a hard balance. I'm sorry, I'm preaching at this point to the choir.
But like to the choir, I mean, I feel you.
But like, I just ended up in a place of complete and total shutdown and burnout, and I just couldn't do it. I just got to a point last year where I was like, you know what? I need a break, and my wife needs a break, and we need to just step back. And it's hard because I'm getting to the point where I'm getting kind of, I'm fixing and I'm itching to, lead worship again. But like, it's, I'm not going to lose my gifting, but it's like I landed in therapy too, right? Like, so it was one of those things where my therapist is like, it's going to be fine. You're going to know, and you're going to feel it's okay. All that to say, I'm totally with you. Like our wives do not get enough credit for putting up with us, let alone the baggage that goes along with the church.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about grace, Micah, and it just makes me think, because like really, I think the only thing that I knew about your situation, you and Ashley's situation, was I think you had a blog, or maybe I may be you had something, and you mentioned something about it, and I think I had a conversation with you. It's probably like the last conversation I had with you when I was still in Ohio before I went to Virginia. And there was a conversation that you were going to be meeting with the credentialing committee to talk about your credentials after the fallout. I don't know if you really want to talk about that, but
I mean, it doesn't make sense if you don't. So what was going on was I went on sabbatical in 2016, right after the Cavs championship.
And,
what a great
great
year, 2016.
Good year. So I got back from sabbatical. I actually didn't even get a sabbatical as much. I ruptured my ACL right before it. And so I had all these plans of going to, Berlin Center, campground, and, these places to refresh and, learn. And I sat on my couch and watched Game of Thrones. So
sabbatical.
I don't know if you have to block that out or not, but
no, you're good. I watched Game of Thrones too.
Hey, listen, if you don't believe that stuff didn't happen in biblical times, you're reading the wrong Bible.
Yeah. Just to spend a little time in Jeremiah, Isaiah, you'll be all right.
First and Second Kings. Saul's concubines.
So I got back from sabbatical. The week I got back, I was told we were renting a facility at the time. We were 5 years into a church plant, or no, we were 8 years into a church plant. And we had been in our own space without setting up and tearing down. So if you haven't done church planting, set up and tear down. It's a huge thing, but it's also a lot of work. And we were in the school building, and they said, "Hey, we're going to knock that building over, and you guys got to go." So I spent the next 9 months finding buildings, fundraising, vision casting, because we were going from, it's kind of uppity town Amherst. I was taking them into the little bit of the inner city, like this is who we're about, and that's like was all of my time. I had to draw blueprints. I had to learn how to be an architect. I had to learn what fire codes were. I had, all this stuff I'm learning from YouTube. And I mean, every moment of my life was about getting this church into its first building. And it was going great. I mean, all things considered, I mean, we were on budget. We were way under budget for what it should have cost. I mean, we were, passing codes. We were building it ourselves and passing fire codes and all that stuff. And I was whooped. I was completely whooped, and home was not a resting place for me. And so I got invited out, and I had way too many beverages. And on the way home, I got a ride from my friend from the church, and I just made a comment that I shouldn't have made, and I wouldn't have made if I wasn't drinking. And so there's a lot of guardrails crossed there. It's like I shouldn't have been driving or riding in a car with, by myself alone with another woman. Like we have kind of these parameters set up, especially if you've been drinking. And that led to some conversations that didn't need to happen, and ultimately to a full-blown affair. And it lasted for about six weeks secretly. And then the church found out about it. And Ashley and the other person's husband found out about it. And we told the church, and I resigned. And the affair lasted for another 6 weeks or so, on and off here, whatever, kind of weird. And I mean, for another 6 months after that, it was kind of just weird with there was some connecting, not connecting. Yeah, me and Ashley weren't getting better at that point yet.
We were nicer
to each other. Yeah, that's true. But I got into the union. I just needed to make some money, and I went from pastoring from home to working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week at nights, and so it was a huge culture shock for our whole family. And that's where I think I started talking to you probably about, I was going to start meeting with the credentialing board.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about, well, before we begin there, like Ashley, again, you could just not even answer this. As all this stuff is going on with the affair, like, and you find out about it, like, what is your reaction to all of this going around?
My first reaction was not awesome. So
yeah, absolutely.
For about hours. Yeah, like the full flip out mode, maybe I'd call it for a couple of hours.
You want to tell me what you did?
Yes, thanks. No, I was going to. So when the woman's husband called me with all these concerns, eventually something stuck that was like, there's something there. And so I found an iWatch with some messages on it that were very, very unfortunate. And they were having a board meeting across the street at a restaurant. So I walked over to the board meeting and threw the watch at him. And that's how he knew I knew. And I left, and then he came home, and I told him, you don't live here anymore. Like, what are you doing? Then, I calmed down and stuff, and I asked him to come home so we could talk. So we talked, and it was just after that, it had to be a constant state of prayer, unknowing what to do next, and so it was none of it was typical stuff I ever thought I would do. But, just see a whole broken situation and a broken person that you don't want to see hurt anymore. So the best way was just try to figure out how to love someone.
So like, it's not uncommon, like in the secular world, for that kind of stuff to happen. But do you think it was just your busyness and your involvement in the church that kind of led to that? If you feel like answering that, if not, like, do you, like, I know that pastors get so burnt out and they live such an unhealthy life that it can lead to poor decisions, drinking, drugs, porn, affairs, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and if not, like, I'm just trying to, like, what led to that ultimately,
Can I answer
then
first?
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
first.
go ahead. Sorry.
I think when any relationship is broken, the way
Yes.
ours was, when there's this not affirmation or this feeling of being liked, loved, or respected, that eventually, I'm not saying 100%, there's guardrails, there's accountability, but eventually there's going to be someone that's going to make you feel a certain way,
Mhm.
pastor or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the relationship itself, the church was a huge stressor, of course, but
Yeah.
without being like, loved, and respected, relationship set up for one partner or another to enter an affair.
Like Scott and I did a series on this show about the Hillsong documentary. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to watch that, but like
Watch some of it, yeah.
some of that stuff, I just sobbed. Like, because some of that stuff I've not personally like done myself, but I've witnessed or been on staffs where things like that have happened, and I'm like, man, how did you get to this point, especially in a situation like that, a bigger church
Mhm.
where you're constantly surrounded by staff? And well, I guess the answer is simple, right? Like the bigger the church, the more the fleas, I guess is what they say. But like, it's easier to hide in a bigger situation like that. Hide your demons, hide your sin, hide your XYZ. So Scott mentioned the credentialing. Did you meet with the credentialing folks, and then what happened post this knowledge being, I guess, exposed?
Yeah. So I had called Esther immediately the next day. So not
Yeah, it was the next
immediately,
day,
but
of
the next
course.
day,
Mhm.
because it was like it was late. It was like 8 o'clock when you found out.
Yeah.
When
Sure.
when you stormed the Capitol there. That's not right. I don't even know why I said that. But so the next day I called Esther and I said, "Hey, here's what happened."
That's getting bleeped.
You're gonna have to. I had nothing to do with them.
Yeah, that's kind of, you can't do that anymore.
If the FBR starts raiding you, Karson, you know why.
So I called Esther and she was obviously upset, and she took over from there as far as leading the board. And I met with the board to tell them when Esther joined. And I met with the board and I told them, and I mean, I don't think I've sobbed that hard since. I mean, I try to explain to people, it's like a church plant. And it's something I think within the Methodist church, which is a little different because you're getting moved around all the time. But like with the church plant, I really felt like a parent who was having their children taken from them. Where it's like, this is mine. Like, this is my I started this, like I created this thing, and now I'm not even allowed to have contact with it. It's like I'm not allowed to like I just have to watch from a distance the pain and the struggle of a floundering child. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing is really how I felt about it. And I mean, I wept. Even though I knew it was like I wasn't right for it at that time. I knew I was completely devastated and I was completely messed up. But then, so that was the first meeting with Esther. And then I ended up meeting with the actual credentialing board for Northeast Ohio, down the road when things had settled down. And
it was like 9 months later, right?
Yeah, it was the next.
No, it was a little bit sooner than that.
Timeline wise, it would have been 6 months because it was next spring.
6 months.
It was that spring. So it was that spring. And there was one guy there that, they gave it to me, you know what I mean? Like the first meeting, they laid it on. And I remember telling them like, man, my biggest fear is that I was like, that there's just be people in hell because of me. I was like, that's my biggest fear, and the one guy in the back goes, yeah, that should be a fear of yours, and I was like, okay, well, thanks. And so we prayed, and I would just tell him, I was like, man, I just want to pray to not have feelings for this person. Like they just couldn't wrap their head around that, like where I could just decide that I wouldn't anymore. I was like, I'm not seeing this person. I want to be in love with my wife. But I have feelings for this person that, man, I just keep praying. And it was something that just didn't click with them, that was, and we had the same issue with our counselor.
Oh yeah, we had one counselor that was like, well, just do this, and it'll just all.
Yeah, and they were like, do you still love this other person? I was like,
they would ask him in front of me about his feelings for this person that we were trying to move past from.
Yeah, like, do you want me to lie? Like, what are we like?
Yeah, that's weird. That's not the point of that. I mean, as a counselor, I can kind of maybe understand that, but
Maybe
I
the
also
first
feel,
time.
or at least maybe that's a conversation you probably should have between
One-on-one.
individually and not with the person you're trying to reconcile with.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he
Like-
refused to move on
Yeah.
until I said no.
Mm,
You know, so it's like I meet with the BPCR board again a month or 2 months later, and the same guy, you know, brings up the same thing that I had expressed as my fear. You know, he's like, there's people in hell because of you. And I was like, well, I get what you're saying, like, but no one's died yet. I was like no one that, you know what I mean? Like in hell, like this is a tough line to take. And it got a little hot. Not too hot yet, but like you could see I was uncomfortable, and I was like, I'm not. So another 2 months goes by, and I got to go back to another meeting with them, and he says it again. And this is 6 months now since our first meeting, 2, 4, 6, right? It was like, or I guess 4 months. So it's like 4 months.
yeah.
And I was like, I'm not sitting through this. I'm not taking. And I looked at the rest of the board and I said, are we doing this? Are you guys okay with this? And I can't sit through this. This is not okay. I'm past this. Like I've moved. There's no condemnation, right? For those who are in Christ. And it's like, I keep showing up here and there's just all this condemnation and from this one guy. And I even told him later on, like when I left, I told him, listen, I'm not going to be in the Church of God anymore. And I told him I'm actually more upset with the rest of the board members than I am with the one jerk. Like, you know what I mean? Like, cause he is who he is, you know what I mean? It's the rest of the board that allows these things to happen. And like I talked about my union meeting yesterday, like I told the board members, like, hey, this isn't okay. Like, I know that guy's a jerk, but y'all let it happen. Right. So we all have different roles and responsibilities in some of those things. And I was upset and I was bummed and I moved on.
So you surrendered your credentials then?
They were already surrendered.
Okay. Well, that's what I was wondering how that kind of went down.
So
They were suspended.
So they were suspended, and then I guess these existential meetings were what to like hopefully get them back. Like
I started the process, and I said, listen, I know I'm called to ministry, and I know I screwed up, and I have no idea how long it's going to take for me to get back into it. But I know that this is the group to walk me through it. Like I know I need to walk with somebody, and they interested. I guess.
The church, I'm not even saying Church of God or UMC, and like, are you ordained in the UMC now?
I just went through the some of the classes down there at the West Ohio conference, but so I'm so church of God.
So you're West Ohio, Karson?
No, I'm East Ohio, but we had our group together.
Oh, okay.
Down there, and we went through. So I'm allowed to do. It's so weird, different from the Church of God. It's like now I'm allowed to do baptisms and I'm allowed to do communion. And,
see, I'm not allowed to do communion, even though I'm a reverend. I'm not UMC reverend, so I can't do I can stand there for baptism.
They don't recognize my
communion, but I can't do it.
They don't recognize my ordination from the Universal Life Church that I needed to do weddings, so they don't appreciate that one.
Well, I was gonna say that like the church, period, not UMC, not COG, not Presbyterian, whoever. I think we do a terrible job with leadership in respect to grace and what happens when a pastor falls due to drugs or an affair or you name the sin, right? What about David? Right? And you probably relate to that probably more than anything, but like, David sent his best friend to die because he wanted to have an affair. Like, it doesn't get much worse than that, right? No. And so, I think of just leadership, and it's like, man, in your darkest hour, that group of folks should have surrounded you and just prayed for you and weep with you, and I can't even begin to walk in your shoes, and I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I'm glad that things have worked out for the better, and I celebrate that. I had a rough ordination experience. Scott had a crazy ordination experience. Like it should not be this hard. And I'm a leadership focus coach now for Church God Ministries. And, I talked to Trey Oldham, who's been on our show a number of times. I talked to him like probably once a week. He used to work for Church God Ministries as a lead pastor. He was in Anderson, now he's in Louisiana. And, it should not be this hard to ordain people that are called to ministry. And then what happens if we screw up? Like, how can, why can't we do a better job of walking alongside people and extending grace and walking them through with what you just said about, healing and restoration and walking beside folks. And I think that's why you just see so many people plant churches that are non-denominational, or that's one of the reasons, or, they go through different, processes of being ordained and just surrendering their credentials to a non, I don't know, UMC or a Church of God, or like not the normal, right? Like going online and, getting an ordination certificate so they can, perform marriages or whatever. But it's a shame. And I mean, Scott, you and I could do an episode on that, but like, it's just why don't we do a better job of, like, the four of us having a conversation right now is probably a lot of healing for four of us who's been through some traumatic stuff in ministry over the last decade plus. And it's
yeah. And
ahead,
the thing
Scott.
I think the thing, like, Karson, I get the whole church planning thing. This is my baby. I built this thing. I worked, I slaved, I lost, I think even from you as an individual, I have spent so much time and effort and angst and cried and done all this thing to get this thing to where it is, even forsake my family for this thing. And now I can't see it. It's almost like, I want to know if that's how Moses felt. You lead Israel, deal with all the crap that the Israelites had to do. Finally, you smack the rock with the stick out of anger and frustration. And then you're like, okay, you can't enter the promised land now. So you're just going to have to watch everyone else go, and you're just going to have to sit there on the mountain and watch and see what happens and hope for the best. Like that, I think in some ways that's hard. The thing that I think is probably the most heinous out of all that is the fact that in your vulnerability, you mentioned your fear. And in those two meetings, that fear was used as a weapon.
Yeah.
To continue to dig. And shame on the jerk. I guess we'll call him the jerk. So I guess if you ever listen to this podcast, you're the jerk. Who you are. But like you said, the tragedy is that no one else in that room said, hey, we're not going to tolerate that.
Right.
We are Christians. If we say we are Christians, if we say we are church leaders, we should always be showing love, showing grace, showing mercy, showing discipline and justice too, because obviously something did happen and there needs to be some type of boundaries. There needs to be some type of consequences, some type of boundaries, but also a plan for restoration to happen if that is the route that you wanted to go. But the fact that even in those first meetings, you're probably thinking, man, I feel called to ministry. I want to be restored within the Church of God because that's all I've known. I grew up Church of God. I got ordained Church of God. I went to Church of God school. This is all I know is Church of God. This is kind of my culture. And it's almost like an Amish community where you're finally to the point where it's like, you know what? If I'm going to I'm not going to get shunned and deal with this and deal with the mudslinging. I'm just going to have to walk away from my tribe and go out in the wilderness. And
that's a shame.
And hopefully another tribe picks me up, or I'm just going to have to kind of come to the real, and maybe you've had that thought, or maybe you and Ashley had that conversation. You'll come to the realization that I'm not going to have a tribe anymore, and I'm just going to kind of be by myself. And what, Ashley, you're pointing to yourself, yeah.
Definitely,
Goodness.
We lost a lot of friends, honestly. We talk about it a lot. Like it's something like, I think I'm a big Jordan Peterson fan. But he says something like the ideal becomes the judge. And so what she did by standing by me while I was not standing by her, there are some people that hung out for a while with her and encouraged her for a while, but at some point they said, you have to move on. And she says, not yet. And it's like, to some degree, and I tell people, I was like, there's no one I've seen live their life more like Christ than she has. And so when you do that, other people go, I could never do what she's doing. And so that ideal becomes a judgment on yourself, right? And so she lost a lot of friends when she was the one that was doing what was right, and doing what God had called her to do. So you have to deal with that. And so now it's like, well, now who do I trust? For her,
Yeah.
I'm outgoing. I trust everybody. Fortunately, so.
Really does.
You're getting the union. You're holding people back from fighting in unions. You're good. Yeah. So talk to me. So after all this happens, what steps were you taking after everything went south? Everything kind of all the dust is settled. What stuff were you both of you taking to kind of reconcile your marriage at that point? And then what steps are you taking now that kind of continue to grow and build up your marriage?
Well, first thing I had done, even in the middle of it all, the crazy parts was taking the self-inventory. Okay, show me what I've done wrong to attribute to the situation. I knew my husband was a bad person, so we didn't just go out and make this bad choice, that something led to that. And so I did a lot of that. How was I being contemptuous? How was I being critical? Those type of things, and really, really looking at that. And the second thing that was important to me to do was to make home peaceful. So whatever was going on, it was going to be peaceful at our house. The kids had no idea anything was going on at this point whatsoever. Like it was just extremely peaceful. So whoever was in our house, kids, husband, wife, it's a place of peace and support. And so that's where we started from to move forward to kind of restore our relationship.
Yeah. She wrote me an apology letter while I was in the middle of the affair. Everyone knew that I was in the middle of the affair.
Wow.
And
just because you did something wrong didn't mean I didn't do anything wrong, right?
Fair enough. So that was that always sticks in my head. And I remember where I was exactly when I looked at it, when I pulled it out of my pocket to read it. That impacted me a lot. And she started working she Googled, like, what did you Google?
Oh man.
It's
It's so rude for you to make me say this. I literally Googled the words, how to save a marriage when the spouse wants out. Like that exact phrase.
And
it came up with a company called Marriage Helper. And so during the time he was still in an active affair, they led me to just focus on myself, self-improvement, physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. And so I wasn't concerned, a little bit, of course, because he's my husband, but instead of being concerned about what he was doing,
couldn't control
at all. It was, how do I better my situation? How do I better myself? How do I better my reactions, my spirituality, all those things? So that, then we went to a workshop they put together for couples reconciling after an affair.
Yeah, we went to that, and I'll tell you, like, I tried to do what was asked.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but like inside, we talked about kind of suicide at the opening here. Like it was like, I was working in very high places. I joined the union. I was working. I decided I'm just going to work. That's where I'm like find my value. That's where I'm going to go to work, and whatever happens with us, I'm going to make sure I can provide if I need to provide for my kids or whatever, however it works. Worst case scenario, I'm going to make some money. And I'm working really high up in the air. My heart wouldn't race, like I could stand at the edge of a building and not feel a thing, and contemplate all kinds of dark things. And I mean, that lasted for
8 months.
Was it 8 months before?
It was. And
I started reading. Like I said, I got into Jordan Peterson. I went to counseling. I was working 12 hours a day and then going to the gym. And it's like I just needed to stay busy, stay working, and that's how I was trying to cope with it. And I got into some of that self-help stuff, and like I said, Jordan Peterson really helped me with some of those things. But we were trying to try churches. We're checking out different churches, trying to stay involved.
Right. But what was happening during that time when you're reaching out to me saying, hey, I feel suicidal, or we're talking about our fears or hopes and dreams of a church or what a future looks like.
Yeah.
In the middle of all that, when where we're becoming best friends, we're sharing things with each other that we've never done before.
Yeah.
And vulnerabilities, and it's huge.
Yeah, we weren't going anywhere with it. I wasn't going anywhere else with I no more. It's the only place I could share bricks, and so it's like you're starting to build this relationship basically brand new. And we came to a point where we said, if we're gonna do this, we're gonna have to leave the other stuff in the past. It's just because listen, I can't make up for that.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do that will make that right, or that will make me deserve you, or any of those things, so we have to, if we're going to move on, we have to actually both move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's great. And I mean, it's, I think we've talked about mental health. Like actually last week's episode, we talked about pastoral PTSD and how my professor said, someone should write a book on that because it's a real thing. And I mean, I believe it. Because my last pastorship, I was there. I was at the place where I was contemplating, maybe everyone would be better if I didn't exist anymore. Life would be better. At least I would, and maybe not necessarily for my wife or my kids, but mostly I'd be at peace. And that was really it. I can stop hurting internally. Up here, my heart, everything, I could just be at peace if I just was gone. And when you get to that moment, it's like you're already numb, completely numb, completely shut off. And it was, and I think that was the hard part too. Like once I left, the hard part for me was the first Sunday I didn't go to church. That was the hardest, because I think the first Sunday we went to King's Dominion, and I'm thinking, this is weird. Why I should be at church? Why am I at an amusement park? Felt guilty, and then I rode a roller coaster, and that went away like instantly. All that anxiety and all that stuff just like disappeared when I went down that first hill. But trying to find another church and and I had the bakery I was working at, Amish Mennonite community. Hey, why don't you check our church out and just tell us what you think. Okay, I'll show up. I'll tell you what you think. And I mean, it was good. I enjoyed it. And then I went to another church with a mentoring pastor that I would talk to all the times, kind of someone who I was laying my bricks with another mentoring pastor who was very good at understanding, listening, and kind of even told me, you're not crazy. Like, you're not crazy. I think there's something wrong here with this culture that you're in, and everything you're doing to try to fix it, I think is the right move. I just don't, it just sometimes you have to move on. So it was hard. It was hard. But then I think there was the peace. And I think even now, just being at a place where I'm not the lead, where I'm kind of just supplementing.
Great, isn't it?
I mean,
what was it you said the other day, Scott, when we recorded the last episode? You said something about like, man, sometimes I go to board meetings, sometimes I don't. But like, well, he doesn't have to. But like,
right.
He said something.
Same spot. I'm the associate.
But even then, like one of my things, talking about some of the things that I used to love going to board meetings and talking about exciting new things and what God's going to do. And and of course you're shaking your head like, yeah, I was too. And now I go to board meetings, and most of the time I just sit there silent. I don't say a word.
Oh, I don't do that, but
well, of course you can, because you're kind of in a lead position. I'm just supplement. And I mean, even that, you're the lead, and now you're the family minister. You're overseeing children and youth. Like, isn't that like a downgrade? I'm like, no.
Depends on who you talk to.
Depends on who you talk to. I don't have to go to like 10 meetings a day in a month. Like I'm good. Like
less funerals, less weddings. Yeah.
You just felt like, you told me, I think you shared with me, that you just felt like this sense of relief, and you just felt like you felt valued. That was what it was. You were talking about how your pastor and how the leadership just they're so glad that he's there because of experience in the Church of God and another denomination about his experience elsewhere and what he can bring into the Methodist Church. And that's part of the reason they hired him, was to bring an outside perspective in to help them with what what they needed to improve upon. And it was just like a breath of fresh air for him.
Yeah.
And our friend Jordan, our mutual friend Jordan that we record with on another podcast, he went through a really horrible situation at the church he was at too. And he's in a better place now. And he was actually in Ohio a couple of weeks ago, and we had lunch and just had a really good time together. And he said, man, it's just, I have all these PTSD moments and these triggers, but like he's in a place where his senior pastor supports him and loves him and says, you're doing great and you're going above and beyond our expectations. And it's like, it's so fulfilling to go into a space like that after such a traumatic experience in ministry, regardless of the situation. And for us, like my wife and I, like we stepped back from ministry last November, right before the holidays. We didn't go to church for 4 or 5 months. Like we watched online, and a little bit of our story. Like I was grad school, working full time, working part time at the church as the creative arts pastor. My wife worked full time. We found out that we weren't going to be able to have children on our own. My mother died the year before. Like it was just boom, 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 right? And we just hit the brick wall. And like we just sat there and we tried to go to church, and we sat in parking lots of churches and we just stopped because we just couldn't go in because we just didn't feel like we were ready. We just didn't feel like it was our place. We felt like lepers in a sense because we didn't know what to do with ourselves. Like Scott said, after he was done being a lead pastor and there was that season in between, like, what do you do? And I've been joking for the last 8-9 months and calling it the civilian pastor life. Like I can go visit, we've been attending a Presbyterian church for like 3 or 4 months here in town. And it's been the weirdest thing ever because they're very traditional, very liturgy driven, and I'm like, this is not I'm a very kind of charismatic worship leader. Let's sing that chorus again and invite the Holy Spirit in this place. They're like, no, we can't raise our hands. It's very different from what we need, but like, I had lunch with that pastor a couple of weeks ago, and he was like, I'm just so glad you're there, and I'm just glad that you're you can give perspective. And to what I said earlier with the credentialing board, like, why aren't we more graceful with folks who have been through traumatic experiences, and why can't we walk with them and do a better job of walking with them and finding that, like, it feels like almost like I've had to do this, Scott's had to do this, and you said that you've walked with people too, like we've had to go out and find our own people. Why can't the church help us after we've served them for so long?
Yeah.
Like that'll be a sermon.
It reminds me of something I said to my wife. This is a couple months ago when we were just talking about whatever, or is when all the craziness with the Church of God and stuff, at the national level. And I made a comment and was like, well, why can't you just let it go? Like, why do you keep getting obsessed over what's happening at the national office and how that's going to affect you? And I said, well, it's like watching a dying parent almost, like in some ways. And my wife goes, yeah, a parent that didn't care for you. And I was like, oh, dang, like it hit like hard, like, because, and I mean, and maybe Karson, you guys can kind of talk about, because I know we talked about what you guys did to kind of, but how is the church that you're kind of attending now, serving at, how has that kind of helped with some of that reconciliation, some of that growth as well?
Do you feel like you're in a better space now? Like,
to do ministry?
Like to serve. Okay. Like that's, I'm sorry, I jumped on you there, Scott.
No, you're good.
I was wondering, like, how do you feel now? Like, obviously you were in a way different place back then. But like
we learned, well, first off, we learned like how to do ministry together, which is kind of like maybe don't that much. You know what I mean? Like we just have different, we talk about how we're how versus wow. And it's like, we just try to, we're a couple. And so we don't do a lot of that stuff together.
No, we have our own interests.
Yeah.
And our own callings, and I'll obviously do some of the they're not weird community outreach events. Like I'll make snow cones and cotton candy with you, and you'll wrap presents for the children of the ministry with me.
But she's not in meetings, and that's where we will have a lot of our angst came at meetings. It's like, because I love them. I love meetings.
Well, one of the things we had to learn, that something that's fascinating to me in the last 6 to 8 months of the season that we're in, has been, we actually go to church together. right? We
That
go
was-
at the same time. I don't go at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not the guy turning everything on. I'm not the guy running rehearsals, and she's rolling in with Starbucks 15 minutes before service starts. Like, yes, I need that coffee, please come. But like we get up, I get her up, we get ready, we go to church, we walk into church, we hold hands, we walk into church together for the first time in our almost 10 years of marriage. It's like, wow, what a concept. We can go to church
did that
together
for a little while. I think the first church we went to, we had one person ask us that they didn't want to talk to us and they wish we weren't there. And so that was tough.
Really happened.
That's a little, I have the screenshots. No, I might not have the screenshots, but I did at one point.
Jeez.
And then we went to another church and, I got involved and, they wanted the theologies don't line up all the time, and it's like, so we moved on from that one and we found where we're at now. And they just, like you said, Skylar, they just appreciate someone, because we went in with the mindset of what would we have liked to have in a parishioner when we were pastoring.
Yeah.
It was like, so it was like, all right,
absolutely.
well, let's take this one pastoral couple and let's take them out to dinner. Like, let's, whatever we can do for them, and just help and be there and that kind of thing. And, eventually they want to put you on staff.
Yeah. Oh, you used to be a pastor and you're treating us so nicely.
Yeah.
Well, you're hired.
So I preached a couple times and then it just kind of snowballed from there and joined a few different ministries and, ended up taking over this other service.
Yeah.
You don't make me line up the chairs anymore.
I don't.
Well,
The Achilles heel was the chairs.
it was the chairs at the other church. Like, Josh Straight, he would have this panic and like, fix my chairs.
The chairs bother me. They still bother me. We have issues about chairs still at this church, but just not with us.
Right.
Is that why you guys keep adjusting your chairs through the whole video now? I'm joking with you. Like, it's not lined up with yours.
But now it's not my issue.
The center of listen, I'm not gonna lie to you, the center of that window not being at the center of these two chairs.
Is that making you crazy?
It has bothered me the whole time.
Oh, well, good thing I can edit that and zoom in into digital and make sure it's leveled just for you. I may cut off like an ear or two, but it'll be fine.
So,
But Karson, Ashley, thank you guys so much for being on the show, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And my hope is that the people who are listening to this, that they not only know your story, but they kind of can relate to it. Because I mean, even just with you talking, I've been in that situation. Micah's been in that situation with just the dealing with the feelings and stuff. And, I think a lot of times anybody can deal with stuff. And, at the end of the day, what the church and what church leaders need to do is when stuff like this happens, when, they have to show grace and they have to surround. I mean, actually in class today, we were talking about James 5:16, bear one another's burdens as you fulfill the law of Christ. And we really sat there and we went around the room and the professor goes, what's the one thing in ministry that ticks you off? What's that button? And everyone went around. And I mean, I've heard things from narcissists, people who say they're going who overcommit and underdeliver. My big thing was church leaders that worship at the altar of politics. Like that was my big thing. And then how's God going to help you deal with that? And how are you going to, and when you're in that situation, how is God going to use you, or the Spirit going to use you to navigate those situations? And it's like, at the end of the day, we all have to deal with stuff. We're all going to have our own ways of dealing with the stresses and the frustrations and the disappointments. But like with Micah being at the Presbyterian church and you and me being at UMC churches,
right.
Like, they have shown grace and mercy, and they're kind of like that tribe that accepted you when your own tribe wouldn't.
Right.
Scott, you know what they have in common, Presbyterian and UMC churches?
Denomination.
They say hi to each other at the liquor store.
They say hi to each other at the liquor store.
I was going to say that they're denominations, but that's a good one too.
They're denominations. That's a good one too. They wear robes, right? They wear robes. And
actually, Pastor Jason at the Presbyterian church does not.
Pastor Colleen, she doesn't for the contemporary service. She does for the traditional service.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for being on the Scott Stedman podcast. And we hope to have both you guys on, or Karson, or even just, hey, Karson, I don't want you on my show. Ashley, I'm going to have you on my show. Either one of you back on the show, it'd be great. It would be a good time to talk. So again, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, man. It's good to talk to you.
Yep.
And if you want to know more about ChristianMingle.com, you can.
Yeah, but friends, thank you so much for listening to the Scott Stedman podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you know a friend or maybe a pastor who you kind of notice things you're struggling with, share this episode, share with friends, give us a 5-star review. And again, leave comments, send me emails, do whatever. If we like it, we'll read it on the air. But until next time, I'm Scott. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will be back on next week with another episode. Take care.